Hello guys, welcome to another video. Before we get started, please subscribe, like this video, and comment down in the comment section below. So recently, the pretty well-known polling aggregate website called 538 has released their new averages for a bunch of swing states that will shape up this next election. And in this map right here, I have already filled out most of the states that already have polling averages in other sites but do not yet have polling averages in 538. So the states remaining: California, Nevada, Arizona, Texas, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida will be filled in using 538's new averages. And I left New York and New Jersey to start off with first because there's some pretty interesting results there that we'll be analyzing. To begin with the national popular vote, currently Donald Trump leads the aggregate by 1.2% with 42% of the vote, with Biden's 40.8% of the vote and Kennedy's 10.1% of the vote. Donald Trump has maintained his lead throughout the whole cycle and throughout the whole time that this polling average has been created. And he actually has been leading by a little more than the beginning of the month, starting around a 0.7, 0.8 lead, then decreasing all the way to a 0.3 lead, and now gaining back to a 1.2% lead. And that's mainly because of a lot of recent polls that have been added that favor Donald Trump significantly, such as the new CNN poll, where Trump was up +6 and +9 with all the third-party candidates. And then the Harris X poll that had Trump up by +4 and +7 with all the third-party candidates added to the race. Just for a comparison on the 2020 results, 538 reported that Joe Biden will have won the popular vote by 8.4%, and he only ended up winning by 4.5%. So 538 definitely overestimated Joe Biden by a lot, and throughout the majority of the cycle, Joe Biden had led by at least 4 to 5 percentage points. And we can look at a different map over here on this new aggregate website, and we can check here. We can see the past elections versus the 538 projection, and we're going to find that in almost every state, Republicans were underestimated, specifically Donald Trump, apart from a few: Colorado, Maryland, and the 1st District of Maine and the 2nd District of Nebraska. But in every other state, Donald Trump was underestimated by upwards of 7.7%, 7.4%, and a lot per double digits in some of these states that don't matter as much. But there's many states, and almost all the states, where Donald Trump was underestimated by a significant amount by 538. So taking this into consideration, we're going to analyze some of the states that they've released recently and fill out our map accordingly to those projections. Let's first begin with the states of New York and New Jersey, which do not have polling aggregates, but do have a lot of polls which indicate a much closer race. Siena College is the main pollster in New York, and the recent 2 polls from Siena College has this race at a likely margin. So this will lead me to put New York in the likely margin. And if we go back to past races in New York, in 2020, Joe Biden won New York by 23 points. And Hillary Clinton won New York by 22 points. And going back, all the way back to the 80s, Democrats have had a very, very significant lead in New York and haven't lost a state since 1984 when Reagan won his landslide. So New York is surprisingly going to be in the likely column. And New Jersey, it's a very similar story. As we can see here, the 2 polls added recently in March actually have Biden only up by 5 and 6 points. And it's very significant to see New Jersey become a lean state according to these polls, from its 16-point and 14-point wins for Clinton and Biden. So this state will actually go down as a lean state for Democrats. However, I do not expect it to end up being a lean state, but these are only based off of the polling averages we have currently. And these other states over here that have already been filled out, that are not in the safe column, are according to the polls. And like in Virginia, for example, Joe Biden only leads by an average of 2 to 4%. Same thing in Minnesota, same thing in Maine. And in New Hampshire is one of the states where Biden is performing strong, leading by over 7%. keeping it in the likely column. Similar things for Colorado and New Mexico. But we're going to begin now with these states that do have polling aggregates, and we're going to start from in California. California is a state where Joe Biden had won by 29 percentage points in 2020, and a similar story by 30 percentage points in 2016 for Hillary Clinton. So, everyone would expect California to be safe Democrat, and it is indeed safe Democrat, but by a lot less safer than the previous years. Biden's lead has been cut down by almost 10 points exactly, leading by only 20 points, but keeping the state in the safe column for Joe Biden. Moving over to our first swing state, Nevada. In the current polls, Donald Trump leads by 6.5% on average, and his lead has grown a little bit since the middle point of the month, but has been fairly consistent since the aggregate began on March 1st. And this is because of a lot of recent polls that had Trump up by pretty significant amounts, such as this +8 here, this +11 here, a bunch of +4s, a +7. And this is a state where Joe Biden had won previously by 2.4%, which is the exact margin that Hillary Clinton won by 2.4%. And these are definitely smaller leads from Obama's 12.5% win and Obama's 6.7% win. So, Nevada is a state that has definitely been trending back to the right when it had previously voted Republican in 2004 and shifted very heavy to the left. But nowadays is much more favorable to Republicans. Republicans did flip the gubernatorial race in 2022 and almost unseated the senator, Catherine Cortez Masto, also in 2022. And this state is going to go in the lean column for Donald Trump. Similar story in the state of Arizona. However, Arizona has been a very favorable state for Democrats, being able to flip the state blue since all the way back since 1996, where Bill Clinton was able to win the state by 2.2%. It's been a very reliable Republican state throughout most of history until now, where Democrats are making significant gains among people in Arizona, and they've won 3 straight Senate elections there, flipped the gubernatorial race, and have been performing very strong, except for now, where Donald Trump has had a consistent lead in Arizona polling and currently leads by almost 4%, which will also keep Arizona in the lean column for Donald Trump. And it's important to also point out the leads that Joe Biden had enjoyed in 2020 in the polls, where he was favored to win Arizona by 2.6% and had led the polls consistently throughout most of the cycle. So it's definitely vastly different to what's going on nowadays, and will keep Arizona right now in the lean column for Donald Trump. And moving on to Texas. Texas is a state where it used to be very, very solid red, but Donald Trump is not really the most favorable candidate for Texas, and it has shrunk basically almost in a third of what it used to be. 15.8% win for Romney in 2012, down to a 5.6% win for Donald Trump in 2020. But in 2024, there is definitely good signs for Donald Trump as he leads the polls by 10.5% on average. And in 2020, it's a state where, Joe Biden was thought to have had a chance in winning, and in some instances that led the aggregate by less than 1%. And Donald Trump finished by only leading by 1.1%, but very different story in 2024, as with many states, where he leads by 10.5%, putting the state in the likely column for him. Moving over to the southeast corner of the United States, we're going to begin with the state of Florida, which Donald Trump also leads by a similar amount in Texas, for 10.5%. And it's vastly different than Joe Biden's projection in 2020. He was supposed to win the state, according to the polls, by upwards of 5 points, and at the day before the election by around 2.5%. And this is a state that has been very, very close throughout most of recent election history. And the Republican candidate hasn't even won the state by more than 10% since Bush in 1988. So if Donald Trump does win the state by more than 10% this time around, it'll definitely be history. I do not think he'll end up winning by more than 10%, but it could definitely get close to that margin. But the polls currently show it at a 10% win. So this will go down as a likely state. And in the state of Georgia, Donald Trump also leads by a strong 6.7% lead. And in 2020, their polls were fairly accurate, where Biden was supposed to win by 1.2%. He ended up winning by around less than 1%. But in 2024, it's a different story. And in recent election history, Georgia has a state that's been shifting hard to the left. So to see it change back and shift very hard back to the right is definitely going to be a bad sign for Joe Biden, and it'll leave this state right now in the lean column for Republicans. The last and final state in this region, and one that Donald Trump must win in order to win the election, North Carolina. Trump is up currently by 5.8% in the polls. In 2020, for comparison, Biden had led by 1.8%, but Trump ended up winning the state by a little over 1%. So this is definitely very favorable for Donald Trump, pulling in over 45% of the vote to Biden's less than 40% and Kennedy's 8%. In 2020, Trump had won by 1.3%, and this state has been very consistent for Republicans ever since flipping to Obama in 2008. Republicans have won the state narrowly each and every election since, and the polls suggest that this trend will continue, where Trump will win the state by a lean margin. Next, in Ohio, a state that Obama had won as recently as 2012, but has shifted very hard to the right in 2016 and in 2020. And the polls, according to 538, currently project that Donald Trump will win by almost 10%, which will expand his lead from 2020 by a couple of percentage points. And in 2020, the polls had Ohio as a very, very close race, even though it was not close at all. So if these polls end up being wrong by similar amounts, which I do not expect, Donald Trump could win the state by more than 15%. But according to these polls, according to the 538, Trump will win the state by a likely margin, putting him at 268, only needing 2 more electoral votes to eclipse that 270, whereas Biden will need to clean the table and win all 3 Rust Belt states to win the election. And this Rust Belt trio is going to be the most important area of the United States, beginning with the state of Wisconsin. Wisconsin currently has Trump at a almost 3% win, which is very much up from Biden's once upon a lead very recently, actually, last week, where he had led by 0.6%. And this state has been very, very close in the polls, and Trump was able to pull ahead because of a lot of recent polls which have had him up by 4% and 10%. And this is definitely an outlier. This 10% poll is definitely going to be an outlier. But these 4% and 1% polls, and along with a lot of these other polls that have been included, definitely help Trump in the state. And this is the state where Joe Biden was supposed to win by upwards of 8.4%, which was one of the worst polling misses in 2020. And in 2020, he ended up winning by 0.6%, and Donald Trump also ended up winning by 0.7%. This state's going to be very, very close, and I expect it to go down to the wire, but currently polls show it at a 2.9% win for Donald Trump, which will put it in the lean category for him. Similar story in the state of Michigan, where Trump also has led by a consistent 2% throughout most of the cycle, and a state where in 2020, Joe Biden was supposed to win by upwards of 8% on election day. He ended up winning the state by 2.8%, which was a very comfortable margin compared to other states like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. In 2016, Trump was very narrowly able to flip the state. So the polls currently show that Donald Trump is currently ahead by 2.1%, which will narrowly place the state in the lean column for Donald Trump. And the final state, probably one of the most important states, Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, Donald Trump currently has a 1.7% lead, one of the most narrow leads he currently holds. And in 2020, it was also one of the more accurate states from these Rust Belt trio, but still not very accurate according to 538. Other models like RCP have shown that the polling miss was practically nothing and that they got it pretty accurate. But in 538, they had a very, very left-leaning bias in a lot of these states. And in Pennsylvania, we can see this is pretty evident, as Joe Biden had led by at least 4% in most of the cycle, where he ended up only winning by 1.2%. So this state will go down as a tilt state for Donald Trump. And this will be our final map according to the polling averages on 538. Donald Trump with 312 electoral votes, Joe Biden with 226. Donald Trump will flip Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. And a lot of these other states from other pollings will stay the same because the 538 does not have a polling average for them yet. But before we conclude this video, let's take a look at Joe Biden's approval rating on 538, where he is approved of by 39.5% of the population and disapproved by 56%. So he has a negative disapproval of 16.4%, which is a lot worse than Donald Trump's current favorables, where he is favored by 42% and unfavored by almost 53%, which is actually a lot better than what it was when he was leaving office. So this concludes our video. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe, like, and comment, and I'll check you guys in the next one.